We talk first about the upcoming budget because the Chancellor is under fire today for supposedly ripping up the rules on borrowing so the government can borrow more money. The Telegraph is leading on it today. Let's have a look at this. Reeves warned over £50 billion debt fiddle. Those are the words of Jeremy Hunt for the Conservatives. The Mail says Labour's budget ploy, as they call it, will punish mortgage holders. And that's the first thought is, Aisha, that if they do this, if they borrow more money, we may have an interest rate rise.
Well, that looks highly unlikely at the moment, because the thing that made interest rates rise after the disastrous mini-budget was that the markets were really spooked by what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have done. And Rachel Reeves has given the markets plenty of time. I mean, this is an idea that's been floated for a very, very long time. The markets are broad. There's been a little bit of movement, but broadly okay. So I think that's unlikely at the moment. I think this is a really positive move. I think this is a very, very positive move. I think that what this country really needs is to spend some money on long-term infrastructure projects. One of the things that's really holding this country back is our inability to get on and do these big infrastructure projects. We've seen HS2 was an absolute disaster. Successive governments haven't sort of invested in things like nuclear. We've got to sort of do a lot of upgrading of our energy infrastructure. So I think this is a good thing. And many people, so for example, I do a political podcast, one of the first people we interviewed was a guy called Lord Jim O'Neill. He's a Conservative Lord. He was a minister under George Osborne, very well-respected Conservative minister. He was advising Rachel Reeves and he said she should do this. Nick Macpherson, who used to run the Treasury, he said that she should do this also. I think it's a good thing to do.
All right, OK. Well, I mean, let's just see the Chancellor explaining the decision to Sky News.
I'll be setting out two fiscal rules at the budget. The first, the stability rule, that day-to-day spending will be funded through tax receipts. The second rule will be the investment rule, which will be to get debt down as a share of GDP. But I can confirm today that we will be measuring debt differently. I'll set out the details to the House of Commons at the budget next week. But the reason we're doing that is because there are massive opportunities to invest in Britain and to get the growth and the jobs of the future here for the UK. And I'm determined to do that. But it's not possible under the current rules.
So we're going to print money, Charlie. Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's buying it. You're sort of, fiddling with the rules, tearing up the rule book. It is just more borrowing. It's just a way of doing more borrowing, which means more spending, more taxes, higher interest rates that we were just
What about the idea, though, from Aisha, which is that if you build really big things, 100 years later, they look really cheap, but they do give you a bit of growth. And I tell you why I say that. I went to the States about 10 years ago and I saw two things. The Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge. And they were massive projects built during the Depression. And now they look as cheap as chips.
And, there's an argument for that, but we've got to look at the current circumstances and the current situation that the government's in now. There is, what they started off to tell us, that there's a 22 billion black hole. That's now suddenly miraculously increased to 50 billion. So you can't, on the one hand, try to say we've got to clean up this mess that the Tories have left behind on the one hand, whilst saying we're going to increase borrowing totally on the other.
It is a fiddle, isn't it?
Plus increasing taxes.
Well,
you're spending money.
Chancellors often do that. In fact, I spoke to a former Conservative Chancellor who said that actually when borrowing rates were low, one of his biggest regrets is that they did not borrow more to invest in things like skills. So I think you can do two... No, it wasn't Kwasi Kwarteng. It was somebody who actually understood economics. So I think you can do two things. First of all, and I don't want to be too party political here, but there is no doubt that this new Labour government has inherited a right old mess. And we all know this because for months, if not years, we were coming on your programmes and discussing what a mess. So that's the first thing. Secondly, yes, Charlie is right. There's got to be quite a lot of difficult decisions about cleaning up the mess. But the big thing we never do in this country, we never look to the future. We always look in very short-term cycles.
I wonder whether they should just get back on and build HS2 on that basis. I mean,
they are planning to sort of, there is talk of doing some of that.
All right, well,
unless we get this country building, we are never going to move forward.
Well, let's see. This is the last throw of the dice here. If this doesn't work, we're out of options. We'd all have to leave. So there's nothing left.
Where are we going to go?
Well, we'll just spend loads of money we haven't got, and we're going to tax the next generation. They're going to paying taxes for the rest of their lives. that are higher than the money that will be spent.
For the rest of our lives. That's how society works.
They'll be overtaxed for the whole of our lives, our kids, and they will not get the services they're paying for because we are basically putting our services on their credit card. And I agree, this is a gamble. It might work. It might work. Maybe it will.
I think that you make a really important point and what we have seen, and ironically, it was under a Conservative government. The highest levels of tax, we're all paying huge levels of tax and not getting the public services we do. So we have got to break that cycle.
Whatever, the austerity as a result of the
that.
financial crisis, and then we had COVID, and we're in a pickle. But then, if there's one thing, some nations are worse off than us. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. There are countries that are doing even worse.
Well,
Germany.
Quite, exactly. So,
So we can feel positive, right?
We can. You know, the current government inherited...
I mean, I'm clutching at straws.
Not too bad. Okay, yes, there was
Charlie,
there's nothing wrong with debt. There's nothing wrong with borrowing.
Say that to the people whose mortgages have trebled.
Well, and you know, interest rates have come down and inflation is down, and they were starting to see growth again in this country. Okay. But what you can't do, you can't put the nation's credit card on the next generation.
Trying not to spend money.
But remember, that is a really... Household finances do not... And that's really important.
I know. I agree with you on this.
Economies are not the same as your household budget.
My friends all say...
It's so illiterate to say that.
We bought this idea from Thatcher. You can only
really
spend money you're taking...